West Berlin. Winter, 1959. The city is a knot of concrete and tension, divided by ideology and patrolled by silence. In a cramped, soundproof room, the only light comes from the warm, amber glow of indicator bulbs and a solitary exposed lamp. A radio technician, his face grim with focus, adjusts the heavy, cold dial of a shortwave receiver. The air in the room is thick with static, a furious, crackling storm of white noise that attempts to swallow all signal. The technician finds the frequency. The harsh static dissolves, replaced by a voice of impossible clarity. It is a soft, deep, defiant female voice, speaking flawless, elegant Polish. She is lecturing, then reporting, then delivering a message of hope so potent it feels dangerous. They called her Anya. She spoke for the Polish underground, broadcasting hope directly into the suffocating silence of the Eastern Bloc. She was the singular, untraceable voice of resistance, instantly recognizable to millions huddled around secret radios in Warsaw, Krakow, and Gdansk. But here, in this cluttered West Berlin studio, the image is jarring. The camera pans across the room, past heavy black curtaining and sound baffles, finally settling on the broadcast equipment. A massive reel-to-reel recorder, its magnetic tape slowly turning. Anya was the celebrity of the Cold War, a symbol of defiance so powerful that Soviet intelligence agencies spent years trying to find the studio, find the signal, and find the woman. But no one ever saw her face. The technicians responsible for the broadcast never saw her enter or leave the studio. Her existence was pure sound, pure defiance. This shortwave station was the raw front line of psychological warfare. For years, her broadcasts inspired thousands behind the Iron Curtain, moving them to small acts of rebellion and faith. But the woman they worshipped, the voice they clung to for survival, was a perfect crystalline illusion. This photo wasn't of a rebel's triumph. It was the visual evidence of a sound engineer's most profound lie. The woman they worshipped never existed. The ashes of World War II had barely settled when Western intelligence realized that the next conflict wouldn't be fought with tanks, but with frequencies. The era of psychological warfare had begun. With the Iron Curtain drawn, agencies like Radio Free Europe and Voice of America became psychological tools, broadcasting hope and news aimed squarely at the Eastern Bloc. But covert operators in London and Washington knew they needed something more surgical than simple news. They needed a symbol. This need gave birth to Project Echo Chamber, a highly classified collaboration between British and American intelligence. Their goal was audacious, to create an ideal symbol of Polish resistance, one that was entirely untraceable and universally appealing. They decided the symbol should be a woman. The theory, rooted in propaganda analysis, was that a woman's voice was harder for the state to hate. It sounded like a mother, a sister, or a loved one speaking the truth, bypassing the intellectual defenses instantly raised by a male political speaker. To bring this voice into existence, they recruited Margaret Huxley, a brilliant but quiet former BBC linguist. Her new task was to shape the voice of freedom, a voice without a body, a character without a history. Her operation was complex, requiring input from multiple actors. No single person could be allowed to record the full script, as that would leave a single traceable individual. Instead, the team began recording small vocal fragments, individual words, stressed phrases, specific tonal expressions, all delivered by different Polish actresses and linguists. The technical challenge was immense. They had to achieve perfect vocal blending and seamless emotional cadence. The recordings weren't just about language, they were about performance. The team had to capture a believable off-mic quality, the sound of a real, solitary person broadcasting in secret. They were building a character through acoustic fragments, piecing together breath sounds, vocal fry, and regional accents until the composite sounded utterly authentic. Huxley's authority was unquestioned because she possessed the technical and linguistic mastery to maintain this illusion. Her credibility was built on absolute technical control and the deep understanding of the human ear. She ensured the language was perfect, the emotional delivery was flawless, and crucially, that the resulting voice was not merely a mechanical reading, but a fully realized vocal personality. This psychological depth gave the voice its resonance. This complex operation provided the credibility for the lie. It proved that the voice was not some amateur signal bleeding across the border. It was a professional, high-grade intelligence operation designed to weaponize sound. The very real technical infrastructure, meticulously engineered to avoid detection, was simultaneously constructing the fictional personality of Anya, the most powerful resistance leader who would never live to see the end of the Cold War. The genesis of Anya, the voice of pure defiance, took place in a tiny, meticulously shielded soundproof booth located beneath an inconspicuous building. Here, the process was one of cold, precise manufacturing. A technician sat before a bank of machinery, his hands moving with surgical precision over magnetic tape. He wasn't mixing music. He was splicing magnetic tape with a razor blade and a light-touch adhesive. The goal was to eliminate all natural vocal flaws and replace them with manufactured human detail. The scripts would be broken down into short, single-phrase recordings from 3 or 4 different voice actresses. The technician would then layer and splice them, creating a perfect synthetic sentence. A single, natural breath from one actress might be spliced in before a key phrase recorded by another. These artificially inserted breaths were critical. They gave the synthesized voice the illusion of physical exertion, the sound of a living person pausing for thought. The resulting tapes were labeled with cold, functional clarity. Real boxes stacked high, bearing codes like POL09, designating Polish segments, or ROM12 for early experiments in Romanian. These tactile objects represented the raw material of the lie, rows and rows of metal reels containing fragmented human performances. The work was painstaking and fraught with conflict. Early synthetic versions were immediately rejected. The voice was too flat, too perfect, too robotic. The MI6 linguists demanded emotional nuance. They fought the technicians, arguing over the correct cadence for a question, the precise speed needed to convey urgency, and the subtle emotional dissonance of blending anger with hope. It required blending multiple actors to produce a seamless human emotional cadence, one actor's powerful consonants combined with another's soft, defiant vowels. The micro scene in that booth revealed the true cost of authenticity, the destruction of real identity to forge a fictional one. The technicians would listen to the spliced track again and again, the unnatural product of their work, to ensure the final playback sounded like one single, dedicated woman broadcasting alone. The conflict was always between the machine's desire for cold perfection and the listener's need for warm, human truth. Every click of the splice block, every inch of tape that was cut, moved Anya further away from any possible real-world existence, but closer to the perfect symbol of resistance they were ordered to create. In Warsaw and Moscow, the signal was powerful, clean, and utterly frustrating. The Eastern Bloc's specialized intelligence units immediately registered the broadcasts from Anya and began the methodical, high-stakes hunt for the source. They deployed teams of technicians, massive directional antennae, and sophisticated spectrum analyzers. Their mission was to trace the signal, find the studio, and neutralize the person. But every piece of analysis returned the same bewildering result: anomaly. The signal was too clean. It possessed no discernible frequency footprint common to covert radio operations, no background hum from a dodgy power supply, no telltale echo patterns from a hastily soundproofed room. A traditional clandestine broadcast would leave a measurable frequency shadow. Anya's signal left nothing but the voice itself. Soviet analysts were left chasing ghosts across the shortwave spectrum. The second anomaly surfaced on the ground. As the broadcasts inspired more action, Eastern Bloc counterintelligence tried to identify the person behind the voice. They interrogated defectors and agents, demanding photos, addresses, or even secondary contacts for Anya. No one could provide anything verifiable. She had no photo, no public history, no shared cell network, and no contact that ever verified her physical presence. The woman who became the most famous dissident in Poland seemed to exist only when the radio was switched on. The most jarring discovery came from an analyst within the UB, the Polish security service in Warsaw. He intercepted dozens of letters and coded messages from listeners directed to Anya, trusting that the resistance would get them to her. He then cross-referenced these with the content of her subsequent broadcasts. He found that Anya often directly referenced specific letters and incidents cited by her listeners, responding to them on air with detailed advice or personal comfort. The UB analyst noted the impossible contradiction. She answers letters that were never mailed. The fact that Anya was responding to internal messages not sent through Western intelligence channels proved she was being fed intelligence directly from inside the Eastern Bloc. This massive, coordinated flow of intelligence, real, actionable data about arrests, troop movements, and citizen distress, was what gave Anya's fictional voice its undeniable authority. The signal was a pure invention, but the information was deadly real. This anomaly drove the Eastern agencies toward a conclusion they could not accept. The broadcast was physically real, but the person was a technical impossibility. The pattern-hunting nature of their analysts only deepened the mystery. They looked for the flaws of human production, a cough, a misplaced word, a sign of fatigue, and found none. They found only perfection. The discovery moment was the realization that they were not hunting a spy, but a technologically manufactured concept, one built to be immune to human trace. This contradiction was the engine of Anya's success and the core of the Cold War lie. In 1961, the success of Anya demanded a high-level review. Inside a tightly secured MI6 debriefing room, analysts and engineers from the British and American intelligence communities gathered to review their invention. Slides were projected onto the wall, but instead of the fictional Anya, it was the acoustic spectrograms of her voice. These were the only true portraits of the resistance leader. The visual evidence was stark. The engineers presented complex overlapping waveforms. A single 3-second clip of Anya speaking a defiant message was shown to contain 4 distinct vocal signatures. One signature provided the deep, resonant tone. Another supplied the precise, crisp consonants. A third contributed the subtle, emotional tremor in the vowels. The engineers had successfully proven, using pure frequency analysis, that what the listener heard as a single woman was actually multiple voices stitched together with impossible precision. This technical proof was met with disbelief. Experienced MI6 skeptics, men who had fought the propaganda war since the Blitz, argued the feat was impossible. No machine could blend that seamlessly, one challenged. The human ear is too sensitive to inconsistencies. The voice has to be organic to maintain that kind of mass loyalty. The old guard refused to believe that synthetic sound could generate genuine political action. Their instinct demanded a human operator, an actual spy under constant threat. The engineers refuted this skepticism using the very data the Soviets failed to find. They displayed an oscilloscope image of the final merged waveform. This waveform was overlaid with the names of the real, anonymous actresses who had contributed the vocal snippets. They demonstrated how digital processing had eliminated all the natural variations, the slight vocal fatigue, the occasional inflection shift, that would reveal a single human speaker. The elimination of these human flaws was the secret to Anya's longevity. Furthermore, they showed a micro-detail, a tiny, persistent 60 Hz background hum that ran through every broadcast, regardless of the time or location of the tape's playback. That single, unvarying pattern was the acoustic signature of the high-end reel-to-reel recorder used in the West Berlin sound booth. This tiny technical flaw, a consistent hum, was the only physical truth about Anya's existence. It was the absolute, technical proof that the voice was a recording, perpetually played on the same specialized machine and never a spontaneous live transmission from a real person. The briefing revealed the psychological deception at the core of the operation. Anya wasn't merely a character, she was a technical consensus, a voice designed by committee to be the perfect counter-propaganda tool. The most emotionally resonant, authentic voice on the shortwave was the product of cold, calculated science. The final lesson of the briefing was not about espionage or politics. It was a terrifying realization. The technology existed to manufacture human authenticity on a massive scale, proving that sound could be weaponized to create deep belief in a person who simply didn't exist. The engineers in the MI6 briefing room had proven that Anya was a splice, a technical composite. but the trial required finding the digital fingerprints of the fabrication across the Eastern Bloc. The greatest break came unexpectedly, not from a successful infiltration, but from a defected Soviet engineer. He arrived in West Germany carrying a briefcase filled with audio analysis logs, the results of the Kremlin's own failed attempts to locate the resistance leader. These logs, covering years of intercepts, revealed a stunning pattern of frustration. The Soviet analysts had repeatedly flagged an identical waveform signature across their recordings. This signature was a microscopic audio artifact, a specific distortion in the high-frequency range that always appeared for the first second of Anya's sentences. Crucially, this same signature appeared in Polish, Czech, Hungarian, Romanian, and German broadcasts, a clear indication that the same synthetic source material was being repurposed across 5 different languages. The defected logs provided the independent, hostile verification the West needed. The CIA then cross-referenced this Soviet data with their own internal studio logs from Project Echo Chamber. The search focused on background noise. They found it, a subtle, patterned background hum that was identical in every recorded segment. This hum was traced back to the specific model of German reel-to-reel recorder used in the West Berlin sound booth. It was an unmistakable machine-generated rhythm, a consistent flaw in the equipment. The verification was complete. The voice was manufactured from fragmented pieces, and those pieces were all run through the same piece of equipment. The repeated, consistent hum pattern was the acoustic equivalent of a studio ID. The engineers had successfully created the voice of a fierce individual, yet they could not hide the monotonous flaw of the machine that produced it. The machine's identity was easier to trace than the fictional person's. This confirmation had immediate and terrifying implications. The success of Anya had been so profound that Western intelligence was now facing a profound moral jeopardy. Exposure of the technology risked unraveling the credibility of every legitimate Western broadcast. If the public discovered that their most potent symbol of freedom was a Frankenstein's monster of magnetic tape, their trust in the entire anti-Soviet narrative would collapse. The trial proved that the original premise of Project Echo Chamber was sound. A synthetic voice, created from real intelligence and backed by flawless technical execution, could inspire genuine rebellion. But the verification also confirmed a dark truth. Their success depended entirely on the Soviets' inability to connect the acoustic dots. The technical verification was a win for the engineers, but a massive risk for the operatives who had built their entire covert influence doctrine on the perfect, untraceable lie. In 1962, the entire covert operation faced its most serious public threat. East German intelligence, frustrated by its failure to trace the genuine broadcast source, decided to fight the lie with a lie of its own. A major East Berlin newspaper published a sensational full-page article claiming to reveal the true face of the Western saboteur. The headline screamed the supposed unmasking of the woman they called Anya. Beneath the headline ran a large black-and-white photograph. The photograph showed a woman, seemingly in her 30s, with sharp features and an intense, defiant gaze. It looked utterly convincing. East German authorities claimed the photo was taken from a surveillance operation and proved that Anya was not a selfless resistance fighter, but a Western-paid provocateur with a criminal past. This was the moment the fictional voice was given a fake body, threatening to collapse the emotional trust the real broadcasts had built. Inside the CIA's photographic analysis lab, a team of analysts immediately set to work on the newspaper image. They were experts in visual deception. They began running complex overlays and spectral analysis on the high-resolution prints, searching for the telltale marks of a fabricated image. The evidence quickly mounted. First, the lighting was inconsistent. The shadows on the woman's face suggested a flash from one direction, while the background details were illuminated by a soft, diffuse light from the opposite side. The two elements of the photograph did not share a single light source. Second, the facial features, the eyes, the nose, the specific curve of the chin, were subtly duplicated and mismatched, suggesting they were stitched together from various unrelated passport or police photos. The image was a composite, a visual echo of the acoustic splicing that created the voice. One CIA analyst, using a custom-built projector, began overlaying the published photo onto the original negatives used by the East German press. As he slowly brought the images into alignment, the illusion collapsed in front of the team. The woman in the photo was demonstrably not a single real person. She was a visual invention, manufactured from disparate parts to fit a political narrative. The discovery was a vital counterintelligence victory, but it cemented a terrifying truth. The two sides were now fighting a war of synthetic identity. The West had created a fake voice to spread the truth, and the East had created a fake face to discredit that voice. The analyst working the machine summed up the realization in a stark moment of clarity. She wasn't a spy. She was an invention. The revelation moved the conflict away from hunting spies and toward proving authenticity. The Western press quickly published the CIA's analysis, revealing the composite nature of the East German photo. The public exposure was a powerful moment, showing that the Eastern Bloc was desperate enough to fabricate visual proof. But the entire episode only proved the devastating efficiency of the original Project Echo Chamber. The real Anya had no face to expose, no body to capture, and no physical history to discredit. The most effective rebel was the one who could not be found because she was designed to be invisible. The set-piece spike of the fake photo merely highlighted the strategic brilliance of the invisible voice. The successful, invisible deception of Anya fundamentally changed the doctrine of covert influence operations for Western intelligence. Her success proved that a manufactured identity could be more effective than a real one because a non-existent person could never be compromised, arrested, or killed. The technical creation of the voice, Project Echo Chamber, became a highly classified template for psychological warfare. The technique was rapidly scaled up and diffused across the intelligence apparatus. Operatives no longer focused solely on gathering hard facts. They began to invest heavily in creating and deploying fictional personas designed to shape public opinion behind enemy lines. This moved far beyond simple radio broadcasts. The methodology expanded to include the creation of character composites, the fabrication of controlled leaks from non-existent dissident groups, and the strategic deployment of voice simulations to sow confusion or plant false narratives. Intelligence agencies began to look at the emerging field of computer science with a keen new interest. They saw the early work in speech synthesis programs happening in university labs and major corporations, particularly at places like Bell Labs, not as purely academic research, but as the next generation of influence weaponry. Covert funding was quietly channeled toward these programs, accelerating the shift from labor-intensive tape splicing to automated digital fabrication. The goal was to replace the reel-to-reel recorder with a transistor, allowing the composite voice to be generated instantly and dynamically, rather than relying on pre-recorded fragments. The doctrine was simple. If a voice could be perfected, an entire personality could be perfected. This was the true scale-up, the shift from a Cold War-era propaganda tactic to a foundational strategy for modern misinformation. The creation of Anya was the origin story of the digital deepfake, proving the concept that the human brain could be reliably tricked into investing emotional loyalty in a persona that was merely code and tape. The greatest weapon deployed in the ideological battle was not a physical device, but the deliberate technological construction of an illusion of authenticity. The Anya template taught the West how to make the lie feel more real than the truth. The ultimate strategic value of Anya lay in the results she produced, proving the astonishing effectiveness of a non-existent leader. Her impact was measured not just in listener numbers, but in tangible, real-world events. Analysis estimates revealed her Polish broadcasts reached an audience of over 4 million estimated listeners per week, a mass audience comparable to the largest official state radio channels. More critically, intelligence intercepts confirmed her direct influence on resistance. At least 19 intercepted messages from genuine Polish underground cells explicitly cited Anya's specific broadcast instructions or encouragement as their motivation for action. Furthermore, there was one documented high-value defection by a Polish officer who explicitly stated he was motivated by Anya's call to conscience, believing her message was a personal appeal. A fake voice had inspired more action than any single real revolutionary figure in the Soviet bloc. This successful operational model was maintained for over a decade. The truth of Anya's non-existence remained one of the West's most closely guarded secrets, not fully discovered by the general public until the slow process of declassification began in the early 1970s. For over 10 years, the voice of the perfect dissident operated with total immunity. The big idea that proved the project's promise was the profound irony of its success. The most effective rebel never lived. Anya, as a concept, demonstrated that the emotional resonance of a narrative, delivered with technical perfection, could override the need for physical proof. The strategic impact was the realization that in psychological warfare, authenticity is a controllable variable. Western powers learned that by controlling the source, they could control the message with absolute precision, delivering a narrative free from the inherent risks of human agents, ego, capture, or defection. The success of Project Echo Chamber codified the understanding that belief is a strategic resource, and the most reliable way to cultivate it is through an untraceable, fictional source. Despite the truth being buried in classified files, the fictional character of Anya continued to evolve in popular Cold War lore. The most persistent and powerful myth claimed that the real Anya was eventually assassinated by the KGB, silenced by Soviet agents as punishment for her defiance. This story provided a tragic, heroic, and satisfying finale for the resistance fighter in the public imagination. This myth, however, was a final brilliant act of manipulation. The correction reveals that Anya's death was entirely manufactured and controlled by her own creators. Western intelligence, wanting to maintain the character's profound symbolic power and avoid the risk of eventual compromise, decided to orchestrate her scripted finale. Her final broadcast, a moving, emotional farewell hinting at betrayal and danger, was recorded, spliced, and broadcast with the same meticulous technical care as all her others. The truth is, the most dedicated, effective, and tragically lost voice of the Polish resistance simply stopped being put on tape. This theme tieback is the final, crucial point of the story, the power of a crafted narrative over truth. The creators understood that a heroic death solidifies a legend and preserves the integrity of the message. If the voice had simply faded away, the movement would have lost faith. If she had been exposed as a composite, the project would have failed. By fabricating her assassination, they ensured that the myth of her courage and sacrifice would continue to inspire long after the reel-to-reel recorder was turned off. The legend of Anya proved that sometimes controlling the end of a story is just as important as controlling the beginning. The chamber may be silent, but its echo is deafening today. The principles behind the creation of the fabricated voice of Anya are no longer confined to hidden military studios. They are the fundamental building blocks of the digital age. Today's deepfakes, the seamless computer-generated synthesis of human faces and voices, are the direct digital descendants of Project Echo Chamber. The early, laborious tape splicing that took hours in 1959 is now accomplished instantaneously by an algorithm. The core tension remains the same: the technical ability to create perfect, untraceable authenticity. When we see a politician say something they never said, or hear a voice that seems real but is entirely synthetic, we are experiencing the perfected legacy of that small, soundproof room in West Berlin. The technology has scaled, but the psychological warfare remains, inducing belief in a persona that does not exist to achieve a strategic goal. The closing shot of the story should be a slow pan over an archival reel-to-reel tape recorder, its massive spools slowly spinning, eventually dissolving and transitioning into a modern waveform on a computer screen, the digital echo of the tape. We are left with a final, profound question about the nature of influence and the price of truth. The story of Anya is a warning from the past about the challenges of the future. The voice of a ghost proved that belief is manufactured and reality is negotiable. She never lived. Yet her voice changed how the world heard truth.